I think that the changing of political structures is important, but more important is how we do it than that we do it, because we can just exchange one nightmare for another otherwise.
Well, what about the issue of hate and anger? How do we deal with that? We were also talking before the program about the whole reality of evil.
Yeah.
That, I would think that evil, in a sense, is beyond some of the things we're talking about. That this is a kind of pure evil that can't be reached. I mean, obviously, the example people always bring up is Hitler.
Yeah.
But it's relevant here, it seems.
Absolutely relevant. Yeah. Well, let me share an interesting insight. One of the most profound teachings I ever got was from one of my mentors, was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, psychiatrist who I studied with back in the 70s, who really was at the root of the whole hospice movement.
Well, also wrote the kind of a seminal book about
on death and dying.
Right.
Yeah, it was a seminal book.
Yeah.
It really was the first time that we started to talk openly about it in this culture. She wrote that in 1968. She had a great saying, which was, before we can see the Christ or the Buddha or the divine light in ourselves, we have to see the Hitler in ourselves. And the point was that we all have that capacity. And if we don't deal with it, it's going to come out. But it's an interesting thing to see it and deal with it, and then say, I choose to live in my higher nature rather than falling victim to that thing, which is, it's mind unenlightened by heart, or mind unenlightened by love. That is pure mind. If you talked to Hitler, he probably thought that he was doing the right thing, He wasn't setting out to be evil. I think that when we look back in retrospect, or we look in current times and say, here's somebody who's just pure evil, whoever that might be in our minds, mm-hmm. and it's different for different people, but Hitler we can usually agree on. Mostly people that act that way don't do it because they say, I'm going to do something really evil. They're doing something that they think is the right thing. But their thinking has not taken in the wider reality of the ultimate good of all humanity. And if we're not thinking about that all the time, we're going to screw up.
Well, how do people reach this point? First of all, this is an issue, I guess, simply of recognizing what's inside of you, mm-hmm. whether it's good, bad, or ugly.
Right.
And secondly, once you've made that recognition, what do you do about it?
Well, I think that you do a variety of things. For instance, I teach meditation. I've been practicing meditation and yoga for 40 years and teaching it for 35. I really don't know any more effective way of dealing with our human mind than some daily practice that gets us in touch with it. So that, and what meditation does more than anything else is to get us in touch with the way our mind works, and to see that it doesn't always work in a compassionate, loving way. It's judgmental, it's selfish, it has violent thoughts, And once you see that, and you see that those are just thoughts, you don't have to act on them so readily.
And you're able to see that through meditation? Meditation facilitates that?
It does.
Because I think the stereotype that people have of meditation is that it empties your mind. It clears your mind.
Well, good luck with that.
I know the times I've tried it, I haven't been able to do it.
Well, that's the greatest fallacy about meditation practice, and people will say, I can't do it because I can't stop thinking. Well, really effective practices in meditation give you the means to deal with that, so that you're not trying to stop thinking. What you do is you learn how to put your attention on something else, something other than your thoughts, so that you become an observer of your thoughts rather than being lost in them. Sometimes the image is like a freight train speeding past, and any thought that you get captivated by, you jump into that car and you ride on that one for a while. Meditation gives you the opportunity to stand next to the track and just watch it go by. And in doing that, you see, oh, there's a fascinating thought. Oh, there's a fascinating thought, but you're not jumping into it so readily. And then that slows the train down. And then you start to see that as the train slows down, there are spaces between the cars. There are actually spaces between the thoughts. And that, in Buddhist terms, that's what nirvana is, space between thoughts.
Once I guess it's not once, this is a perpetual thing, that you've seen the spaces or felt the spaces.
Yeah.
I'm not sure there's a difference, I guess. Again, that's recognition. What about implementation? How do you transform or transmute, I guess, the idea into action?
Well, through a variety of means. First of all, the principle is that happiness and love and compassion are our natural state. But the mind, the human mind, sometimes referred to as the monkey mind, there was a great Swami named Vivekananda who said the human mind, left to its own devices, carries on like a drunken monkey with St. Vitus' dance that's been stung by a scorpion. Just total random chaotic motion. So when you develop the potential to not be so caught in your thoughts, you naturally start to notice that being happy and being loving and being peaceful and being compassionate and generous feels better. It just feels better. It's sort of like...
It's better to give than to receive.
Well, that's one way to say it, although the mind gets reactive with that and says, well, that's kind of a trite saying, but it's true. I mean, literally true, that because another thing that we get confused about in this culture is that we think, whenever we hear the word grief, we think of death. Whenever we hear the word love, we think of romance and sex.
Right.
Right. There's a form of love that's much higher than that. And I don't mean higher in a judgmental sense. I mean it just like romantic love, as we said at the outset, is full of grief. But there's a form of love that isn't, that is just like the sun shining.
Okay, I was going to say, tell me about that. What is that higher love?
Well, it's that place which most of us touch or taste in some way throughout our lives. And then there are these little fleeting moments sometimes that we hardly even notice. But I know you were sharing with me that you've got some grandchildren now. And I would imagine that there are sometimes moments when you look at a grandchild, and maybe when you originally looked at your children when they were, beautiful babies, and you're thinking about, you're just in the awareness of the miraculous nature of life. And there are moments when you're just like, oh, this is so good. I just want to stay in this place forever. And you look into your baby's eyes or whatever it is. And you can even taste it through romantic love, that initial thing of like, oh boy, this is what I was born to feel. Now that's getting a taste of our true nature. It's a little, we've gotten to see through a window, or a door has opened momentarily, and we get that feeling. Now notice that in those moments, even the people you don't like don't look so bad. It's fascinating. In that pure state, you have natural compassion. You look at someone who generally irritates you, and suddenly you say, something terrible must have happened in that person's life to make them so miserable. Isn't that sad? Instead of saying, why is that jerk acting that way? It's like, isn't it sad that they're that way? Another way to say it is, love is just more fun. It isn't a question of, and see, what our mind does is our mind shuts it off by saying, that person doesn't deserve love, so I'm not going to love them. That person doesn't deserve
Well, in terms of relationships, does love translate into generosity, care, concern?
Yeah, it does. And sometimes we can use our mind as a tool rather than being ruled by it. We can use our mind to say, hey, I remember the last time I felt loving and peaceful, and I wasn't cranky. I was happier. So why don't I do the things and think the thoughts that get me into that state rather than all of this anger and bitterness and fear and so on? I'd just be happy. I mean, I know it sounds kind of Pollyanna-ish at times, but But it's literally true. Why would you want to spend your life in fear? You know? The mind tells us, well, if I'm not fearful, I won't be safe. If I'm not on guard, worrying about what's going to happen. How do we know what's going to happen? And look, you know, I know we talked about this because one of the first times I was on your show was shortly after 9/11.
Yes, right.
And look at what happened to us as a culture spontaneously on 9/11 in the face of something that was completely out of our control, that just completely blew our concept of how we were safe and secure and everything was lovely, and something that was unthinkable. Well, what happened? I mean, we had a vision of hell at ground zero, but all around that for a few days, a few weeks, maybe even a month or two, people were acting in this incredibly loving, kind way in which we suddenly noticed. So that was a case in which a loss or a terrible circumstance, something that scared the wits out of all of us, scared us out of our minds, actually. And when we were out of our minds, we went into our hearts and we said, well, you know, who knows how much longer any of us have. We didn't know what was going to happen next. How many attacks were planned? Would we be able to stop them? And what that did was it said, when you and I are sitting together in that consciousness, well, we may die together. So let's get to know each other. You know, let's relate in a loving, open way. That'd be a good way to go out.
Right.
So that's how, I mean, that's how it gets our attention, and it happens spontaneously. Nobody had to sit down and say, well, how should we react to this? It happened spontaneously.
I've often thought that in some ways, I don't want to put it, this might come out wrong, that we like disasters, in that it gives us a reason to express something that is true in us. Our generosity, our care, our sense of oneness. That really there's not that much difference between us. It's unfortunate that we need a disaster to recognize that.
Well, the cultural training that you were talking about is so strong that the truth is the culture is geared to keep us always dissatisfied, you know, and that's how we keep the economy flowing, is by constantly wanting things and buying things.
Creating need.
Well, it isn't need, it's desire. Needs are pretty simple, really.
Well, we think they're needs.
Well, that's another, we think they're needs.
We only have about 2 minutes left, believe it or not.
Oh my goodness. See that?
We're
How
have to
quickly
come back
it goes?
another time.
I'd love to.
In your works in your writing, I guess, about faith and prayer, do you think we've lost a sense of, or we need a sense of mystery and wonder?
Well,
25 words or less.
Oh boy, that's a whole show.
I know, it's not fair of me to bring it up this way.
Well, I think that there is a natural sense of wonder. You know, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and give you some theological perspective on what's true. I have no idea. I know what's true in terms of being happy and being a little more healthy and enjoying life. But what it's all about, I can conjecture, but I don't know. And I enjoy that mystery.
Yeah. I mean, part of life is learning to live with a mystery and learning to appreciate the wonder without necessarily having to explain it.
Exactly. Exactly. That's it. When you give up having to know intellectually, because there are just things we can't understand. Okay, let's be content with that.
Speaking of content, I'm really glad you've been on. We have to do it again. There has to be.
Anytime, Bill.
A reprise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Great to be with you.
If you'd like more information about this or any other Carpe Diem program, write to us at the email address on your screen, carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158. And for Carpe Diem, I'm Bill Berlin, and thanks for watching.